You think silence means indifference, for instance. You think distance, he doesn't care. No, sometimes silence is screaming. Sometimes distance is panic wearing a mask. And when an avoidant acts like Tchisk, he's begging you not to walk away, but he can't say it. Because saying it would mean admitting you matter more than his fear. And he doesn't know how to do that. When an avoidant pulls back right when things feel good, right when you get close, right when the connection starts to feel real and warm and stable, that isn't him losing interest. That's him losing control of himself, of the narrative he's built for years to protect his own heart, because somewhere along the way, love became danger and closeness. When an avoidant pulls away, when they go suddenly shift from warmth to coldness, the average person sees that as a loss of interest, but from your kitchen. You're told they've lost feelings. You're told they don't care anymore. But what no one teaches you is that for some people, distance is not rejection. It's protection. What looks like disinterest on the outside is often terror on the inside. Every time you get closer, they don't just feel love. They feel vulnerability. And for someone who was never taught vulnerability is safe, closeness becomes a trigger. They can't handle the intimacy because they were never taught how to survive it. You're taken. So they push you away, not because they don't want you, but because they don't know how to have you without losing themselves in the process. People with avoidant attachment are not emotionless. They are emotionally flooded. Their system is wired to equate emotional closeness with danger. So when someone starts to matter, when you start to touch their soul in ways they haven't felt before, it doesn't calm them. It alarms them. Their heart wants connection, but their body is in fight or flight. If their feelings say stay, but their nervous system screams run. That's why they can look so cold, so detached, so indifferent, because their instinct for self-preservation is stronger than their desire for love in that moment. And unless you've lived with that kind of internal war, it's easy to misinterpret it as cruelty, but it's not cruelty. It's survival. You can be the most loving, consistent, kind-hearted person they've ever met. You can show up with truth, with loyalty, with compassion. And yet, the closer you get, the more they panic, because it's not about you. It's about the fear inside of them that says, if I let this person too close, they'll see the parts of me I've spent my whole life hiding and worsening. If they see those parts, they'll leave. So before you can abandon them, they abandon the moment. Before you can hurt them, they hurt the connection. That's why so many avoidants sabotage good love. It's not because they don't see its value. It's because they fear its power. Real love threatens to melt the emotional armor they've spent years building. And once that armor melts, they feel exposed, naked, powerless. And for them, that is terrifying. The emotional shutdown is not a power play. It's not manipulation. It's not a calculated move to hurt you. It's a reflex. It's a deep-seated trauma response to anything that feels like emotional dependency, because needing someone makes them feel weak. Being seen makes them feel unsafe. Your kitchen. And when you reach for them in love, their instinct is to retreat, not because your love is wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. It breaks the pattern. It challenges the script. It invites them into a reality they've never trusted. So instead of leaning in, they pull away. And in doing so, they test the limits of your patience, your worth, and your self-esteem. But here's what people don't understand. When they start acting cold, when they stop replying, when they suddenly need space or create conflict out of nowhere. Most of the time, it's not because they've stopped caring. It's because they care too much and don't know what to do with it. Closeness activates fear, not because you're dangerous, but because the possibility of losing you feels like emotional death. So they distance themselves from the very thing they love. Because somewhere in their childhood, they learned that closeness is unstable, that affection can be taken away, that love can flip into pain. And those lessons run deep. They don't disappear just because you're a good person or because your intentions are pure. Trauma doesn't respond to logic. It responds to perceived threat. And love to an avoidant can feel like the biggest threat of all. Even when you're doing everything right, even when you're patient, supportive, gentle, they can still pull away. And that's where most people get confused. They ask themselves, what did I do wrong? But that's the wrong question. The real question is, what did they learn about love that made it feel unsafe? because your love didn't cause this reaction. Their past did. And your presence now is pressing on a scar they don't talk about, a scar they've covered with independence, pride, and emotional distance. But deep down, that scar still aches. And when you get too close, it flies. What you see on the surface, a shutdown, a lack of affection, a sudden detachment, is not who they are. It's who they became to survive a world that never made them feel safe and intense. And the tragedy is they often push away the people who would love them best. Not because they want to, but because that old wiring still runs the show. And unless they become aware of it, unless they choose to do the deep, hard work of reprogramming that system, they will continue to treat closeness like danger and love like a loaded weapon. And in doing so, they will sabotage every healthy connection that comes into their life. But that doesn't mean they don't feel. That doesn't mean they don't care. In fact, many of them care more than you can imagine. They just don't show it in the ways you expect. They watch your every move while pretending not to notice. They think about you while convincing themselves they're better off alone. They want you to stay even when they push you away. And that push isn't hatred. It's fear, a primal fear of being seen, of being needed, of being loved in a way that forces them to be emotionally vulnerable. Because vulnerability to them still feels like pain, not peace. You'll know it's fear when you see the pattern sudden silence after a deep conversation, pulling away after a moment of connection, picking a fight just to create distance, giving you just enough to keep you invested, but never enough to feel secure. Those are not the actions of someone who doesn't care, but from your kitchen. Those are the defense mechanisms of someone who is terrified of how much they do. Someone who's used to protecting themselves by pretending not to need anyone, even when they're desperate for closeness. And sometimes the most loving thing they can do for themselves is to push away the person they love most. Because to them, love is risk. Kitchen, love is vulnerability, love is danger, and to survive it, they shut down, not because they don't feel, but because they feel everything. What looks like rejection is often something far more complex, far more human, and far more wounded. You're watching them shut down, go quiet, withdraw emotionally, and your instinct tells you they're done with you. Your heart whispers that maybe you did something wrong, that maybe you asked for too much, got too close, moved too fast, said something they didn't like. But the truth is, you could have done everything right and still triggered the wound they've spent their entire life hiding. Because with avoidant people, what you interpret as rejection is often their nervous system trying to survive emotional contact. It's not personal, but it feels personal because it hits where it hurts most. The closer you get, the more unstable they feel, or not because you're unstable, but because connection threatens the very structure they built their identity on, which is safety through emotional distance. But they don't back away because you're wrong for them. They back away because they don't know how to feel safe when they're close. You must understand this. Emotional withdrawal is not always a strategy. It's often a reaction. It's not a cold choice made with clarity. It's a reflex born from emotional trauma, often dating back to a time they were too young to process pain, too young to fight back, and too vulnerable to survive abandonment without building walls. So they built them. And now those walls get triggered by closeness, not cruelty. They shut down when you offer love. They avoid eye contact when you get too real. They speak in logic when you want to speak in emotion, not because they're empty inside, but because their nervous system doesn't know how to hold love without feeling overwhelmed by it. What calms you ignites panic in them. What feels like connection to you feels like danger to them. And so they protect themselves with silence, sarcasm, distance, and detachment. You think they're rejecting you, but they're rejecting the fear of being swallowed by your presence. They aren't trying to hurt you. They're trying not to fall apart. And it's heartbreaking because you love them and they love you too in their own way, but that love exists behind 10,000 invisible layers. Every layer was put there by fear, by experience, by memory. Memories of not being chosen, of being punished for expressing need, of being told to toughen up, not feel, not cry. So now when you hold space for them, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like risk, because love is the one thing they've never fully trusted. And when someone who's been starved of emotional safety meets someone who offers it, They don't always say thank you. Sometimes they run. This is what people misunderstand the most about avoidance. They don't shut down because they don't feel. They shut down because they feel too much. Because once their guard drops, the floodgates open. And inside those gates is grief, anger, loneliness, fear of abandonment, fear of being exposed, fear of being too much or never enough. So they'd rather stay emotionally frozen than risk a flood they don't know how to control. What feels like a wall is actually a dam holding back years of unspoken pain. You try to touch them emotionally and their system short circuits. They go blank. They retreat. They distract. They sabotage. Not because they want to lose you, but because they don't know how to keep you without losing themselves. And that's the agony. They want to be loved, but they don't believe they're built for it. They want connection, but connection feels suffocating. They want to be held, but intimacy feels like exposure. So they stand at the doorway of love, frozen between desire and fear, but from your kitchen, between craving and avoidance. And when you come too close, they lean on what they've always known distance equals safety. They won't say it out loud. They probably don't even fully understand it, but the behaviors don't lie. One minute they're present and engaged, the next they've gone cold. One day they're texting you with warmth, the next they vanished. You think they've changed their mind, but they're stuck in a loop. Love, panic, withdrawal, repeat. You're not witnessing a lack of emotion, you're witnessing a person caught in the grip of a trauma pattern. And trauma patterns don't care how good you are, how patient you are, your kitchen, how loyal you are. They only care about survival. When an avoidant shuts down, it's not to punish you. It's to protect the wounded part of themselves that still fears rejection, betrayal, humiliation, or abandonment. It's to silence the voice inside them that says, if I let this person in, I'll be hurt again. And that voice is loud, so loud that even when their heart whispers, stay, the fear screams, run. And fear always wins when it hasn't been healed. You may feel invisible in these moments. You may feel like your presence, your effort, your love means nothing to them. But that's part of the illusion avoidants create to stay emotionally safe. They pretend not to care because caring has cost them too much in the past. They pretend not to need you because needing someone has always been a liability from your kitten. And if they admit that they care, if they show how much you matter, they'll feel like they've lost power. Not power over you, but power over the part of themselves that vowed never to be vulnerable again. So they keep their heart behind glass. They love from a distance. And when that distance starts to shrink, they panic, not because they're done with you, but because they're afraid of being undone by you. The heartbreaking part is they rarely say what they're really feeling. They don't say, I'm afraid you'll leave. They don't say, I feel safer when I'm alone. They don't say, your love makes me feel things I'm not ready to face. Instead, they say nothing, or worse, they say things that push you away. They focus on your flaws. They criticize the relationship. They find excuses to disconnect, not because they've stopped loving you, but because they're trying to manage the overwhelming flood of emotion surging through their system. Their silence is not always apathy. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism. Sometimes it's the only language they know when the emotional volume gets too high. So you have to look deeper. You have to read between the lines. You have to understand that when an avoidant acts cold, they might be burning inside. When they act distant, they might be terrified of needing you. When they act detached, they might be feeling too much. And when they walk away, it might be the only way they know how to cope with the fear of being abandoned by someone they care about. It doesn't make it fair. It doesn't make it easy, but it does make it human. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is recognize that looks like rejection is actually a trauma response trying to keep someone from collapsing under the weight of their own emotion. The most misunderstood moment in the entire avoidant dynamic is this: when they act like they don't care, when they pretend they've moved on, when they say, it's not working, and walk away without flinching. That moment is not always rooted in truth. It's rooted in fear. From your kitchen. It's not always them being finished with you. It's them trying to finish what they feel powerless to control. You think they're cold, but they're collapsing. You think they're numb, but they're overloaded. And when an avoidant pushes you away with conviction in their eyes and silence in their mouth, what they're really saying underneath is, please don't go. It's just their mouth won't form those words, and their pride won't allow the desperation to be seen. Because the moment they admit they need you, they also admit they could lose you. And for them, loss is not a bruise, it's annihilation. So they choose the only path that feels safe. They push first. Every time they pull away from someone they love, they experience a paradox inside that few people ever see. They H for closeness, yet run from it. They long to be seen, yet hide. They crave your touch, yet recoil when you offer it. And when you finally say you're done, when you finally mirror their distance, when you finally stop chasing, they don't feel relief. They feel devastation. But they won't chase you back with flowers and apologies like the movies. They won't beg. They won't show up at your door, because doing that would mean facing their greatest fear, that you have the power to shatter them emotionally, and avoidants cannot handle that kind of power imbalance. They'd rather lose you than face the terror of needing you. But the moment you pull back, when you finally stop texting, stop calling, stop checking in, that's when everything inside them goes silent. That's when the fake peace crumbles. They watch your absence like a movie they can't pause. They check your socials. They wonder who you're with. They stare at your old messages, but they won't break their silence, because breaking the silence feels like surrender. And if there's one thing avoidants learned early on, it's that surrender equals pain. They watched people leave them when they were vulnerable. They learned that attachment was unstable, that love was conditional. So they built a version of love that lets them safe by staying in control. And as soon as you challenge that control by walking away, but their fear masquerades as indifference. But inside, they're in turmoil. You think they feel nothing, but they're feeling everything and trying not to drown in it. They remember the way you laughed. They replay the last fight. They think of texting you and delete it 1,000 times. They go out with friends and feel empty. They try to date someone new and can't stop comparing them to you. They lied at night wondering if you've really moved on. And that question haunts them from your kitchen. But they won't tell anyone. They'll pretend they're fine. But the truth is, every part of them is whispering, please come back, even while their actions scream the opposite. The most powerful thing to understand is that pushing you away is their way of saying, I don't trust myself to keep you safe here. Not physically, but emotionally. They feel unworthy of love that sees through them. They feel unprepared to handle love that asks them to show up fully. So instead of disappointing you, instead of failing at something that matters, they eject themselves from the equation, not because they're heartless, but because they're scared of being exposed as broken. They fear that if they let you stay, you'll eventually find out that deep down, but from your kitchen, they don't believe they're enough. And that fear becomes so overwhelming, they sabotage the very thing that made them feel alive. They don't just fear your abandonment, they fear what your love reflects back at them. Because your love says they're worthy, they're lovable, they're human. And they've never known how to carry those truths without cracking. When they say, we're not good together, it might not mean I don't love you. It might mean I love you too much, and I don't know how to survive that. When they block you, they're not always trying to erase you. They're trying to escape the version of themselves that can't stop thinking about you. When they act indifferent, they're shielding their emotions behind the only wall that's ever worked in silence. And what hurts the most is they often don't realize the damage they cause until it's too late. They think the pain will fade. They think they'll move on. But instead, they carry your memory like a secret tattoo, hidden, but always burning. They hear songs that remind of you and pretend it's just a song. They drive by places you went together and swallow the H. They look at your name in their phone and feel paralyzed, and that paralysis is what keeps them coming back. Fear that you've outgrown them, fear they've caused too much damage, fear that if they let you back in, you'll see how scared they really are. That's why the most heartbreaking behavior of avoidance is not the leaving. It's what they feel after they leave, but never say. It's the silent longing, the hidden regret, the internal storm that no one sees because they're experts at hiding pain. You'll move on and they'll pretend they have too, but from your kitchen. But at night when it's quiet, they'll wonder what would have happened if they had just let you in a little more. If they had just said what they really meant instead of saying nothing at all. If they had been honest about how much they cared instead of masking it in withdrawal and coldness from your kitchen. And some of them never recover from the one person they pushed away because they didn't know how to hold something real. You were not forgettable. You were not irrelevant. You were the moment they were finally seen, and that moment scared them so much they ran. But running doesn't erase memory. It doesn't erase love, and it doesn't erase the they carry long after you're gone. You were not someone they got over. You were someone they learned to bury. And even in that burial, the heartbeat never stopped. You were the trigger for a part of them they tried to avoid their entire life. And when they acted like they didn't care from your kitchen, what they were really doing was begging the universe to somehow bring you back without having to say a word.